What's changed about lead generation in the past 15 years? It's still a game of form fills and outreach, but today's lead gen programs run on data. Today, we're talking to Jason Gladu, COO of Convertr, about the volume, velocity, and complexity of data in lead gen today. Welcome to Conversations with MarTech. This episode of Conversations with MarTech is brought to you by SEMrush. Meet your unfair advantage, a new SEMrush uniting search and AI discovery into one powerful marketing growth engine, delivering richer data, more keywords, deeper AI insights, and prioritized next steps. With SEMrush, you can turn total brand visibility into coordinated action. Get a 14-day free trial and a discount code. Visit martech.org/SEMrush-coupon or scan the QR code.
I'm Jason Gladu, the Chief Operating Officer at Convertr. I oversee sales, marketing, help out a lot on the product side. I've spent the better part of 15 years in the ad tech and MarTech space, working largely with the technology and enterprise brands. The simplest way to think about like what we do is we tend to sit at the point where third-party contact data enters a business system. We validate, duplicate, and govern every record before it reaches the CRM or marketing automation. And this is where I spend my time. I get to talk to a lot of great companies out there about how they try to keep data clean and try to prevent that downstream damage.
All right, so it's easy to look at lead generation and in B2B and say very little has changed in the past 20 years. You just said you've been in the business for 15 years. People are going to fill out a form. They're going to access content, or they're going to see an online event. They do so with the expectation that they're going to get some sort of follow-up, whether a phone call or email from a vendor. But what has changed?
Yeah, I think, the mechanics look incredibly similar on the surface, right? Like you said, the form, the consent, the follow-ups, the phone calls, but I think what's dramatically changed is that the volume and the velocity of those interactions. We can talk about whether that's thanks to AI, thanks to some of the SaaS companies, pre-AI that sort of came up over the last 10 years or so. And I think the other major thing that has changed is sort of like those downstream expectations placed on the data. It's no longer that a lead just comes in and it just like somebody calls it, right? Like that's kind of a thing of the past. Now you've got a lead that's like triggering massive amounts of like automated nurture sequences. Maybe it's got an AI scoring model. It's feeding a predictive analytics machine somewhere, and probably influencing a pipeline forecast. And so like, while the form looks the same, I think everything after it sort of looks probably relatively unrecognizable today. I think the other major change has been the number of sources. This has just exploded. I think we can think back, 20 years or so, and it's probably a handful of sources. You had your publishers that you kind of worked with. You maybe were buying lists. You maybe were getting some leads on if you had a website. But you're not just running sort of your own webinars anymore. You've got leads coming in from a ton of places, and all of the places now have different standards and forms of data, different formats. And now I think the largest change in that space has sort of been this explosion of these AI enrichment tools, whether it's Clay or Unify or Common Room, any of these, they sort of are aggregating a massive amount of data, making it really cheap and effective and easy to get. But now you're just sort of introducing mass amounts of data at scale into these, enterprise brands. And so you're really seeing this big disparity between the gap in the infrastructure that's able to handle this sort of data that's entering a business, and how do you control it? I think that's probably the biggest change that I've seen.
What does a modern lead gen strategy, a successful modern lead gen strategy, look like? And what is it that prevents organizations from reaching that bar?
I would say the modern approach is, it really starts with like this assumption that data and the data quality is a precondition, like not an afterthought. So we're really focused on, how do we make sure that data is as good as we can get it, right? You can have the best content, rather the best targeting, the best sales team, but like if 30% of that data coming in is terrible or garbage or spam, and 20% of it is a duplicate of your CRM, like you're kind of just running on a cracked foundation. You've got this great, content and great programs going out there, but you're just not going to convert it. And so when we think of like that modern look and feel, I always think about it as like a real-time validation at that point of capture, wherever you are in the world. And I think one of the most interesting pieces of that, sort of change now is how do you address the sort of ads or forms in a lot of the new ways in which we communicate and interact on the internet, which is largely the sort of AI, chat like interface, depending on where you are. And so I think that's kind of this new frontier is like, how do you manage that? And then to your second point about like what prevents somebody from getting, to this, maybe a successful strategy kind of in this new age. I think the first thing is it's sort of a culture. It's largely cultural inside of companies, because I think data quality has historically just been treated as an afterthought, or like a that's a marketing ops problem. It's really not a strategic problem. It kind of lives somewhere on the org chart that people can't identify. There's probably not even a single owner for it. You've got a bunch of blame game. Marketing blames the vendor, sales blames marketing. It's just the same thing that's always happened. And I think the big thing is like companies tend to discover the problem only when something breaks. And unfortunately, what tends to break at the end are, the most expensive breaks are sort of the compliance issues, like the GDPR. You get a DSAR or something like that. That's sort of the worst break that you could possibly have. And so I think that's sort of the challenge that most companies have. And if you can clean up sort of the ingestion of it, make sure you've got the infrastructure, focus on the data, you're really going to be able to, move as quickly as your new, content strategy and ad strategy can handle.
I feel like it's also one of those things where companies know they need to clean up their data, or they know they need to change the way they're doing things, and it's sort of like the best time to start is now, but there's usually something preventing them from starting now, like the status quo, and that it's working enough.
Yeah,
it snowballs because you never fix it.
Yeah, I think it's a really hard, challenge to solve, especially when you get into like the enterprise space at scale. It's not like there's just one CRM or one marketing automation platform in a lot of these large companies, right? You're thinking like they sort of, if a large enterprise has been built based on acquisitions, oftentimes there's multiple marketing automation platforms and multiple CRMs, and a lot of bespoke sort of data sources and software and automation and rules that live inside of this big machine. And so it becomes really challenging to untangle it and then like track back where the issue happened, which is why I think for so many of them, it's much simpler to just kind of put up that firewall at the outset and say like, okay, that way we can at least kind of stop as much as we can from coming in that's bad before it's going to like run into the complexity of the pipes that move the business forward.
All right. Let's talk about AI. It's got risks and it's got rewards. Like you talked about, it can help you run lead gen in a number of ways. It can help you clean up your data. It can help you deduplicate. It can help you get rid of the junk and focus on the good stuff. But there's also risks in the way that some folks use it, like the AI SDRs that will beat prospects over the head until, I've heard people have told me an AI SDR never takes time off. It never gets sick. And okay, that's true. But what is it doing all those days it's in the office?
Yeah. I think there's certainly risks and rewards. I think I'll start on the reward side because it's, for me, it's probably shorter. I think, I always view AI like if AI is the right tool for the job, let's use it, right? I think it's incredibly powerful. Whether you're sort of creating new content, kind of finding new audiences, right? Like lookalike modeling, all of those things. I think there's really a lot of power in the model. On the publisher side, you think about like assigning, content to an audience that you think is going to perform, and sort of all of that analysis that goes on, I think is incredibly powerful. I think on the risk side, for me, it kind of comes in two folds. The first is what I call like just downstream data risk, which is a lot of companies are building internal, AI tooling, for lack of a better word, and it's looking at data from all over the org, which is amazing, and it's going to help them make these great decisions. The problem is, because of how good AI is and how fast it moves, if it picks up bad data, which it has no idea is bad, because it just assumes everything in this database is good for me to use, you're all of a sudden in a really, really bad spot, because now you're sending an email that's mispersonalized. You are assuming this is a real person. You're assuming you have consent to email or target or do anything with this person if you're sort of in the marketing world. If you're in like product and product strategy, you're assuming that the data set is representative and clean when you have no idea, right? This could have been synthetic. It could have been a bunch of bad data. We know that at least 30% coming in is bad. I think 96% of companies, I think per ZoomInfo say they assume that they've got a data quality problem, or they know their data is bad. Well, if 96% of people, in companies think their data is bad, it's probably closer to 100, just given how close we are to that number already. And so it's like, I've seen these AI data stores, building recommendations for sales teams, right? If you're doing that based on bad data, now you're having sales waste their expensive time chasing something that doesn't exist. And so that's kind of this first bucket of challenges I see, which is really manageable, right? It's really manageable and really preventable. The second is, I think, probably a larger one, which is sort of hallucinated data and sort of like the privacy and consent of that data, which is like, if you are using an LLM for any sort of lead generation activity, I think lead is a very loose term, right? Whether somebody's actually like given consent or not. So depending on how you define it, I would say this probably wouldn't fall into the consent bucket. But if you're using it to identify data, how do you know it's real? How do you know it wasn't hallucinated? And that's not just on the sort of basic information, right? It's sort of like all of the long tail information about that individual or company becomes really challenging to know the veracity of that data. And so that one, I think, is sort of this newer space as people are starting to try to wrestle with data acquisition and sort of lead generation from a contact perspective at scale. So I think that one's probably a little bit more challenging to solve in the short term.
If somebody is unsure about the quality of the data that they're using in their lead generation strategy, and I'm thinking somebody who's new to a job probably has a good idea of whether the data is good or not, how do they get started evaluating that data and like addressing the data quality issues that they find?
Yeah, I would just recommend starting with an audit, and that's not always the easiest thing to do, but it sort of helps you understand and kind of get your hands dirty. It's like, what do we actually have today? So you could look at something like, if you're talking about like a CRM database, how complete is the data in the records? How accurate are they? What's the sort of like, where do you fall on this deduplication spectrum, which is like, I think on average, 30% of CRMs have 30% of a CRM's database is duplicative. And then sort of like, how consistently are you getting this information, and then how relevant is it? So those are kind of the 5 sort of core buckets I tend to look at. I think once you do that, you kind of have a baseline for understanding of, okay, where do I fall in sort of the quality of my data? And then the second step I recommend for people is to sort of numerically calculate the cost of that data. So you could look at things, we've built this calculator, but it in effect shows it's roughly about $117 it costs a business for every bad piece of data they let in the door. So that's things like media waste, database size waste, right? You're just pumping bad data into a database, marketing ops time or sales ops time, sales rep time, and compliance exposure. Those are kind of the things that make up that $117. And so we often tell people, once you understand where your data falls on the spectrum, if you want to address it and you need to make a business case, this sort of calculation can help you at least pinpoint the structural cost that you're sort of incurring on a yearly basis and help you build a case to sort of resolve that, whether that's sort of, nobody's going to wipe it fresh and start over, but sort of like do some sort of cleanse. If you're going to invest in something that's sort of going to more continuously monitor the integrity of that data, sort of like in a looped fashion at run on a cadence, you can sort of make that case with those figures.
That is for any marketer who's trying to get leadership, especially beyond marketing, to understand what they're trying to fix. Put a number to it, right? That's what everybody wants.
yeah. It's it's like it's all based on a lot of public data around a bunch of different research reports. And it's like, just put a number to it. It might not look pretty, but you'd rather have that database be clean instead of every 6 months talking about why we're having email deliverability issues, or I can't send, why can't we send more emails to our customer base? Well, it's like, well, because you're getting a lot of unsubscribes, or you're getting penalized because your deliverability is poor and you're getting some sender reputation issues. So I think there's a lot of things that go into that database hygiene that notwithstanding just sales wasting their time chasing ghosts, but also all of those, especially the bigger the company, the reputation risk from just a pure email perspective becomes huge, right? I think that's one of the key metrics that people don't often look at, is like, what is your hard bounce rate, and how does that impact, if you're a very, very large company who sends a lot of emails, you've got to keep an eye on it, because every percentage point matters in whether or not that email is going to go out to your consumer base, or your enterprise customer base, whatever it is.
Yeah. Jason Gladu, he's the COO of Convertr. Thanks for joining us on Conversations with MarTech.
Thanks, Mike.